Hi, so this month we're going to look at injuries in a little bit more detail. So what the difference between a muscle spasm and a muscle tear really feels like, and what the differentials within training or coaching and your coaching program are like as well. So we'll look at how we adapt the coaching program, looking at how we adapt lifestyle, and looking at really how we don't panic when these things happen, because it's a fact. We're going to get injured at points. We're going to have aches, pains, niggles, right? And we've got to figure out how we compensate for them and how we overcome them and rehabilitate them. So the first thing is, if we look at a muscle tear, for instance, okay? So you get different grades, grades 1, 2, and 3. So grade 1 is like a minor tear. Grade 3 is a full slice through, okay? It's full penetration. What we want to think of is, if you're training and suddenly you feel like, oh my God, it's almost like, the only analogy I can say, because I've had a muscle tear, is almost like you've been shot. That is what a muscle tear feels like, right? It's just a consistent pain that is there, and then it kind of goes away and comes back again, and that's when you get all this inflammation and horrible stuff kicking out around the muscle, and it literally does stop you in your tracks. From there, what you often find is that every time you put pressure or try and use that muscle, you can't use it. It's painful. The joint doesn't want to move the way it should do, and it feels like the range of motion is really limited that you can perform, and you don't have as much control out of it. So that's what a muscle tear really feels like. If we have a look at a muscle spasm, now this particularly relates to lower backs, because it's one of the more common places where people have muscle spasms. What you feel again is it stops you in your tracks like a muscle tear, but once you start to relax, you can move through it. And muscle spasms shouldn't last too long, whereas a muscle from point of injury tends to take anywhere from like a minor strain, which is a couple of weeks, to 6 or 8 weeks to really heal. A muscle spasm will be almost like the muscle is gripping, and you physically can't get into position. So if I move into a hinge position here, and just wanted to go through my lower back, so I'm doing like a bad hinge, and wanted to move in here, that's fine and pain-free. But if I had a back spasm, I wouldn't be able to go there, because this would grip, it would bite, it'd be taking over, and I wouldn't be able to go any further than that. And that's when that muscle is either compensating or it's gripping and gone into some form of spasm and lockdown, probably because of fight or flight reaction, probably because of some biopsychosocial factors that we've talked about previously in posts. And the other thing could be purely because of bad movement technique. You've used that muscle, you've overstressed it and overstrained it, and it's gone into protection mode, so it's gripped you to prevent you, or gripped to prevent you doing that particular movement. The other thing we find is we get general aches, pains, and niggles. And this is generally as we age and get older. So what we find is we get up in the morning, we're really stiff and achy. Well, that's because we've been lying in the same position for a good little while, okay? And because of the amount of activity we've done the next day. But once you've been up, you've been moving around, you start to feel better, but you think, oh, my shoulder's a bit niggly today. Oh, my lower back's a little bit niggly today. As we age, we have mechanical breakdown. So this is where we start to become a little bit less efficient at moving. We have ingrained patterns of what we call taking the path of least resistance. So what we mean by that is we just take the easiest path to do a movement, which often isn't the most efficient. And we do this for a long period of time. Over that period of time, these efficiencies break down. Muscles get used to that pattern, but they're often not the most efficient. So what happens is then we start to develop aches, pains, and niggles, and instability. And what we want to try and combat is that. We want to try and teach you the most efficient path of movement while creating stability and mobility and strength. And when we couple stability, mobility, and strength, suddenly we move very, very efficiently. And suddenly we should start to feel that we're moving a lot freer without the aches and pains. Again, what I tend to find is I get up in the morning, I can feel the effects of the previous day's training. However, once I get moving, I still feel pretty good. But when I notice aches and pains, it's like, okay, what am I not doing correctly? What has been going on? Why am I picking this up and my shoulder's sore? Oh, I'm not using my shoulder blade correctly to do it. Instead, I'm just gripping through my shoulder. Or, oh, wait a minute, I've picked that dumbbell up. Oh, I didn't hinge properly. I used my lower back, so now it feels just a little bit niggly to do it. I haven't used the correct hinge pattern with core engagement, which is the path of most efficiency and least resistance, okay, and is going to give me that greater stability. So really in this series, we want to think that when you're coaching and when we're being trained or training, that if we have aches, pains and niggles, it's often there's not enough stability or there's a compensation going on. If we have a muscle spasm, why has that spasm occurred? And how can I work around it? And how can I make that spasm feel nicer and make it feel more stable so that I can move through it? Generally, we can adapt a coaching program to that and get you to start to move through things and do things like we talked about in previous posts, like 90-90 breathing, to relax the sympathetic nervous system, to take that stress and fight and flight syndrome out of it, and then start to get you to actually move into that area in a stable position or a stable function. So that what happens is, for instance, if we have a lower back spasm, we do some 90-90 breathing that we talked about earlier, and then where that person's hinged, like so, before we get them to move through their lower abdomen and move into their hamstrings, glutes, and start to feel stability in that position. Or we also then start to say, well, say it's my right side, I want to move into my right side more, so I'll just get them to push back into that right hip to feel them move into it, so that they then gain confidence in doing that and they overcome that fear. And we'll adapt that into the training or coaching program. What we would then do is adapt different exercises so that they can, we'll adapt their exercises or their coaching program so they can do things. It won't be as intense, but they'll start to gain confidence and overcome that fear of doing any further damage, if they've done any damage, or any fear of them going to be in pain for a lengthened or a heightened period of time. If we've got a muscle tear, that's when it's a slightly different approach, because we probably involve a clinician more to diagnose and to help with that, and then for them to go through more of a clinical rehabilitation process and come back to us after that. However, a lot of people, again, like we talked about in previous posts with the guy with the broken ankle, they still come to us for coaching because we modify and adapt the training program, and we'll work in conjunction with the clinician through their rehabilitation process. What that would then mean is that the program's adapted, they're still working, say it's an injury in a quad muscle, they're still working on a lower body program, but it's a lot more isolated. It's probably going to be a lot more single-sided until the clinical side of things is complete, or until the physio or osteopath says, right, you guys can get back to doing what you're doing now. So really, to sum all of this up, if we're looking at a muscle tear, it feels more like a gunshot, a sharp pain that is just there and releases and then comes back again with some form of swelling or inflammation around the muscle area. If it's more of a spasm, again, it's a sharp pain that lets up after a little while, but whenever you do something, it aches or it tweaks when you go into that movement pattern. And if we just feel aches, pains and niggles, it's often stiffness, tightness, or a lack of stability in that area, or moving through the path of least resistance versus the path of most efficiency with the greatest stability. Yeah. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a back spasm. So say I was doing an RDL, for instance. So I'd set up for my RDL, I get into position here, I do what I normally do, but I get distracted or something would kick in and bang, I go through my lower back, okay, and I feel like oh, pain. So that would mean somewhere around this area is really spasmy, and if I tried to do this, it would hurt, I'd be gripping from it. Okay, or you might see me kind of leaning and being pulled to one side because there's a big spasm here. The first thing that I would think of doing is the opposite of what my instinct says. My instinct tells me that I just need to grip onto something for dear life and wait, and that I can't move. I actually need to get over that fear. What I actually need to do is to get down onto the ground and just slow everything down and breathe. So I would set myself up on the ground somehow. Now you may need someone to assist you to get down. You may need to drop down to your knees. However you can get down, get down. Lie on your back and put your feet up. Squeeze the roller with your adductors and then just belly breathe, okay? And literally just stay here for as long as it takes for you to feel a lot more relaxed, okay? And then once that happens and once you start to feel a bit more relaxed, then start to move again. So you would really just roll and fall to one side, okay? Release the roller and just start to try and get up. Sometimes you just have to sit in a quadruped position, like so, and then you just have to breathe through it and breathe into that lower back. It can do, yeah. You're just putting mobility through the spine. So if you want, you can protract the shoulder blades here and just mobilize the spine even more, like so. Again, it's working within comfort or discomfort zones to try and relax things and trying to mobilize things. From there, I would come up into a standing position. If I need to, I could just standing belly breathe. The next thing I would do now, I'm back up in that standing position. Bear in mind, this could take 10 or 15 minutes to go through that cycle. The next thing I would then do is come up and put the bar, obviously deloaded, up onto the rack, and I would just go into a hanging squat position here. And in that hanging squat position, again, I'm just trying to round and curve the whole spine, and I start to belly breathe again. Okay, and that should feel pretty nice because the whole back's rounding, you're releasing everything around there. Often, and again, this is from experience, once I've done that, I can actually move a lot easier. Now, it's not going to completely take away the spasm. You're not going to suddenly be completely cured. You're not going to suddenly be going and running a marathon after this or back to deadlifting PBs. You need time for the body to settle down. It's had a fight or a flight response. There's a large amount of adrenaline going through there. You're going to have compensation patterns going on where you're wanting to just relax. You don't want to do too much after it. However, what you do want to do is keep moving. Yeah, you don't want to suddenly go and sit and be like this all day. You want to be walking as much as you can. And from experience, again, the more you walk, the more you move, the more you mobilize things in a dynamic way, the quicker the spasm goes away. The quicker you recover and the quicker you can get back to moving and doing loaded movement patterns.
Hi guys, I'm Aidan from GTG Coaching. So today we want to do some sort of video or helpful content upon muscle strains and tears, how you come back from muscle strain and tear. So there's three main areas when it comes to an area or a muscle that's torn or had a strain, and it comes down to grade 1, 2 or 3. So basically a grade 1 is like some of the fibers have been strained or there's some small tears. Grade 2 is like there's a significant like partial tear, like almost like a good part of the muscle has been torn in half, or the belly of the muscle has been separated from the tendon, not fully. And then a 3, we tend to be where like there's the whole muscle has been torn, or it's been completely separated, or really significantly separated from the tendon. The way to sort of know this is range of motion afterwards, level of discomfort, and the loss of strength from it. So grade 1 is you'll probably still have pretty much a full range of motion, and there'll not be much loss of strength in that area. And then grade 2 there'll be a reduction in range of motion, and there'll be a significant loss of strength. And then 3 will be you basically can't really use the area at all, like it's agony. So think of something like bicep completely tearing off of the bone, that kind of idea, where you're not really going to be using that muscle. It's going to be extremely painful. You're not going to have much range of motion at all. Really, when it's these 2 areas, you're talking about that can require surgery. In this area, you're basically looking to see a medical professional or go see a therapist for quite a long period of time. You may need to go through medication, that kind of idea first off. But a grade 1 is usually something that you can just recover from and begin to manage your training. So first thing you end up kind of looking for is, can you get full range of motion back first and foremost? But then we're going to look at, why did it happen? So why did you get the tear? So most of the time there's a significant and acute increase in activity or output. They can see someone bump something up, and a lot of the times it will come from eccentric loads. So what I mean by that is like a hamstring tear is really, really common because it comes from sprinting, which goes under a lot of stress as the muscle tries to lengthen or goes through a lengthening contraction, an eccentric load, and that's when it tears. So somebody begins to sprint a lot, that muscle's not used to it, and then goes woof and tears. It doesn't go woof because muscles don't make that noise, but we'll pretend for this video that they do. And so you're looking at that, or force distribution. So maybe that area could handle the load, like the strength of the muscle in comparison. Let's say hamstrings are a great example, happens loads. The right and the left hand side are of equal strength. But maybe something else further up down the chain isn't doing its job, and therefore force distribution isn't even. So one hamstring takes way more load than is necessary, and then it goes woof, and then it strains or it tears. So that's basically what you're looking at. So figuring that one out first and foremost can usually stop it from reoccurring. If it just happens to be a case of it's weaker, then you usually see that in terms of other areas in training beforehand. Again, these 2 we need to kind of ignore, because that you have to go, especially this one, but 2 you would need to go through probably medication and take some time off and manual therapy and things like this, and allow the area to repair. This one, bit of time to heal and try and get back into training. So usual aspect from that part is to begin to go through full range of motion. And then eccentric work, so basically stretching the muscle under load and gradually building up to that until you get to the stage that the strength in the affected muscle is recommended to be 90% of the unaffected side. So the hamstring that got damaged is 90% as strong as the hamstring that didn't get damaged. But there's actually a bit of debate in that. It's been shown that up to 20% difference doesn't seem to have a big deal. But general rule of thumb to remain sort of safe in that area is a recommendation of a difference of 10% between the 2 areas. Once you're there, you can get back into the same sort of level of training you were doing. A lot of times partial tears or grade 1s tend to be a couple of weeks in healing, sometimes up to 6 weeks, but 2 to 3 weeks before you can get back into some sort of loaded exercise. So when it comes to strains and tears, did it come from increased activity? Was it eccentric loading? Is there any sort of weird force distribution? That's sort of areas you look into. And then after that, you're just trying to go back to these areas of increasing activity in that area, loading it eccentrically and getting it back up to the fact that the force distribution between the 2 areas is roughly even, and there's at most a 10% difference in strength from the affected muscle and the unaffected muscle.